Welcome in to the Arrowhead Addict podcast. I am Matt Verderame. We are joined, of course, every single Thursday by Ben Heisler from BetSided as we make our Chiefs' best bets. And we had a bye week last week, but we came on, we did some long-term bets. Now, some shorter-term bets. The Tennessee Titans coming to Arrowhead Stadium on Sunday Night Football. Both teams are 5-2. And yet, this is not a line where you would think that both teams are 5-2. We will get to all that here throughout the show. But Heisler, how you doing?
I'm good, Verderame. I'm excited for what I actually think is going to be a more compelling matchup than maybe most people anticipate. And yet I can't put my finger on why, because you're right. 5-2 teams, a matchup that over the last several years, the Titans have actually had the upper hand. And you can't say that about many teams against Kansas City, but they're 4-1. Their last 5 matchups against the Chiefs against the spread. So you can't help but wonder what they're doing that actually might make these games a little bit more compelling, especially this year. And I got to tell you, man, odds makers have zero faith in Tennessee to make this game remotely close. And that's a bit surprising given their recent history.
I think it's a combination of a few things. So one is the Chiefs with Mahomes, because pre-Mahomes, I don't care. With Mahomes against Tennessee, they are 1-2. They beat them in the AFC title game, obviously. Right. Beat them pretty good. They got clobbered at Tennessee last year, 27-3. Probably the ugliest game of Mahomes' career. And then they had that crazy game where he was coming back to the knee injury and he threw for like 440 yards. And they were winning, and then they blew the thing late because they had a botched field goal attempt and all these other things. I think that the reason the line is as high right now is in all of those other games, Tennessee either had Corey Davis, Julio Jones, A.J. Brown, or some combination, 2 of them. They don't have any of those guys now.
Correct.
Like, you could make a real argument that if McCole Hardman was on the Tennessee Titans, he would be their best receiver. He has, I think, 40 less yards than Robert Woods, but Robert Woods has like 20 more targets. So they have nobody offensively outside of Henry. Like, nobody. Tannehill's not been good this year. They have no tight end to talk about. They have no backs to catch the ball particularly well. They have no receiver that scares you. The line is rated as one of the worst in pass protection. So I think that's why the line is so high with Vegas. Vegas probably looks at this and thinks, look, if Kansas City gets up on them by any margin, this game is over. Because Tennessee is not throwing the ball to stay in this game. But to do that, the Chiefs have to get a big lead, and they have to get Derrick Henry to be less of a factor.
Yeah, that's going to be the biggest question here, is because the Titans are going to dictate what their game plan is going to be right from the very beginning. You know where it's going, and you know that Henry needs to be able to have a massive output for them to remain successful. Malik Willis, I think almost assuredly, is going to be starting again. It hasn't been confirmed, as far as I know.
And if he's starting again, they're going to lose by 35 points.
Well,
he should.
They should. The Titans defense, I think we came into this year. You and I were both not particularly high on Tennessee. Now,
no. 500.
We're ending up with a little bit of egg on our face because the Colts are shit too. And Jacksonville right now is in a tailspin. And now you're looking at Houston, who's also, 14.5 point underdog tonight home. It's the worst division in the NFL, at least at this point. I don't think there's any question about it. But with Henry, the question for him this year was going to be whether or not he can stay healthy. For so long, and this is a trend too, like if you play fantasy football, that scared me away from Henry, is running backs that have run for over 2,000 yards, the following season, they just fall off a cliff.
Yeah.
Like historically, every single one. Henry was on pace to have an even higher workload last year than he had the year before when he had 2,000 yards. And yet he still was on that pace to not shatter the 2,000 yards and targets and opportunities and volume, but he was close. Like, he was the definitive leading rusher in the NFL. Jonathan Taylor hadn't sniffed him, and then he went down with the injury. So now that Henry is looking back healthy, it's a question of whether or not Kansas City's defensive front, which made some bounce backs over the last few weeks after getting gashed in the running game, whether or not they're going to be able to stop him. Because if they can't, And Willis, who's going to be playing his first ever game away from home in Arrowhead in prime time. I'm not saying the kid can't handle it. You know,
Oh,
at one
I'm
point he was
I'm
projected
saying
first
I'm going
round
to say
pick.
that. No, I'm absolutely going to say that. Did you see him last week?
He wasn't good, but again, it
Oh
was
my
his
God,
first
man.
ever start. I'm not going to come out and say that this kid can't do it. He's a professional quarterback. I don't expect him to, and it's all a matter of, especially now that the Chiefs are healthy in their secondary. That's going to be another key element here too. Is they're going to force both these guys to have to run and scramble, and that's going to lead to turnovers, and maybe that's where that big lead really starts to come in.
So listen, if Malik Willis, and I by the way, if you go back and look at anything I've written, I love Malik Willis coming out of college.
Yeah,
I'm not selling that like he'll never be able to play. I'm not selling that. Right now, he cannot play. Like he just flat out is not ready to play in the NFL game. That's not his fault. He's not ready. He's developmentally, he is nowhere near ready to play right now.
correct.
He had a 4.1 QBR against the Texans.
Yeah, not great.
Ben, I'm not kidding. If he plays this game, the Chiefs are winning this game by 35 points. Like this is, if I were the Chiefs, I would play cover zero and just put every single guy I have in single coverage and say, here it comes, every down. Like there's no way he can play when I would give him all the credit in the world if he plays and they're even remotely in the game. That being said, that's really not even so much. I mean, look, some of that's a commentary on Malik Willis and where he is right now in his development. But really more of that is Tennessee is just absolutely ill-equipped in this game to stay with Kansas City if they have to throw the ball, regardless of who the quarterback is. Like, Tannehill's obviously a better quarterback right now. He's been around. He's more polished. He has chemistry. But to me, this game comes down to one thing for Tennessee. Henry has to have a massive game. They're not winning this game, even if he goes for 100 yards. Like, he has to go for $150, $170. I mean, he's going to have to. And the funny thing is, as much as the Chiefs, as you pointed out, and you're right, have not been great against Tennessee over the last handful of years, if you look at his logs against Kansas City since Mahomes has been there. So it's not been what you'd think. Now, the first game, he was great. That 35-32 win, they had that crazy game in 2019 when the Chiefs won the Super Bowl. In fact, that was the last game the Chiefs lost that season. Yep. Henry went nuts. He went 23 carries, 188 yards. It was highlighted by, I think he had like a 77-yard touchdown run. Last year, even though they pounded on Kansas City, he only ran for 86 yards on 29 carries. It's less than 3 yards an attempt. If he does that in this game, it's over. Like, beyond over. So I think for Tennessee, you know, sometimes when we sit here and we break these games down, there's a lot of different components to try to figure out. This game's not that hard for me to figure out. Like, this game is just, look, the Titans have to play a very specific way. The defense has to keep them around in the game. It's always got to be around a possession or so. Henry's got to be bleeding the clock and keeping the score down and keeping the Titans offense on the field. If that doesn't happen, it's going to be a killing. They just do not have the horses outside or under center to stay in this game.
Yeah, it's nowhere near the same team that we saw from a season ago. And again, a lot of the offensive weapons that you mentioned is a big part of it. They're also missing guys defensively. But I want to go into a couple different numbers as to where the line currently is. The initial look-ahead line when all these games come out in the offseason was the Chiefs at -6, which made sense. Better team at home Sunday night. The numbers from Mahomes in primetime games on Sunday night have been historically good, and we'll get to that coming up in a little bit. It's moved, obviously, to the Chiefs at -10. That was the opening line last Sunday with a total of 47. The line now has moved Kansas City to -12.5. Saw it go to 13 yesterday. It has since come back down just a tad. And the total has moved from 47 to anywhere between 45.5 to 46.5. And again, for anybody looking to try and find that best line, if you think the under is in play, you want to make sure you get that 46.5 as opposed to just going to one book that's got 45.5. And Arrowhead Addict has all that information. If you go and find some of the articles that we've had over the course of the site, BetSided certainly has it as well. what we'll do is it shows you exactly where you can find those best odds, whether it be on the spread, the money line, or the total. You can just click right to it. It'll take you to that book. So it makes it super easy to find. Current line, Chiefs minus 12.5, total between 45.5 and 46.5.
Yep.
I think if you're looking at it from that standpoint as to why we're starting to see the total move down, yes, it's because Willis is likely to start. But on the other side, if it's Kansas City, they could get off to a big lead and Willis could turn the ball over and maybe that adds to more points on the Chiefs side. But you almost have to lean under purely out of the idea of if Willis isn't going to get this team to move and it's only going to be on Henry, that turns down the clock, that moves time of possession, and it keeps Kansas City off the field for longer extensions of time. So right from the get-go, my initial play on this game was on the under.
I hear you. I wouldn't go near this total for one reason. I don't know what Kansas City team you're getting. Like, is this going to be one of these games where the Chiefs are very content to try to just play a very ball control? Like, all right, we're going to dunk it underneath. We're going to play a shorter game. I guess it's similar to, I'm trying to think of the right game to compare it to. Kind of almost similar to the Raiders game. Now, the Raiders game, they also started out playing awful for a quarter and a half and still scored 30 points.
Right. But then the Raiders also scored in that game.
Right. True.
We're talking about two drastically different offenses between.
No question.
No
question. Let's put it this way. I would lean more line than total in this game, but I also think if you're going to go toward the total, especially if Willis plays, I mean, this might be a thing where the Chiefs score 35 points and they still at the under. I don't know. Like, I was looking up some offensive stats for Tennessee. I looked them up yesterday, but I wanted to pull them up right now. So yards per drive, Tennessee is next to last in the NFL. Only Houston is worse. Points per drive, Tennessee is a little better, 23rd in the league. Third down rate, Tennessee is 24th in the league. By the way, if you're wondering, Kansas City's first on third. Kansas City is converting 52% of its third downs. The Chiefs are miles better than anybody else in points per drive. They average 3 points per drive. The next best is Buffalo, 2.66. The yards per drive, the Chiefs are second. Here's one thing that is interesting. These are the two best red zone offenses in football. Kansas City's one, but at 0.2 of a point behind them is Tennessee. Tennessee's very good in the red zone. So if they get in the red zone, you got a problem. But yards per play, which is Vegas' favorite stat in the world, Kansas City is second. The Titans are 28th. So, look, I get the underplay. The underplay is literally just going to be based off of Tennessee's not going to score a lot of points. And maybe because of that, the Chiefs' offensive output is pressed down a little bit.
All right, so let's go through some of these numbers as well. And I saw that our guy Brian weighed in, was curious as to whether or not Kadarius Toney might be a noteworthy bet this week. A lot of sportsbooks haven't come out with his number yet. I saw it at one book, plus 225. That's way too high for me to have any interest in. For a guy that hasn't played it down yet in Kansas City, like if Kadarius Toney came in at 4-1 or 5-1, think about all the weapons that they already have on this team. Like, you don't know which of the three running backs has an opportunity to get goal line carries or carries inside the 5. Mecole Hardman has been a touchdown machine. You have Travis Kelce in the red zone. Juju's been catching touchdowns the last couple of weeks.
Yep.
Like, I like the idea of using a weapon like Toney creatively, and they're going to get him more acclimated over the course of the year. But I mean, we're still waiting for Sky Moore. This is a guy that they've had through the entirety of the season and the offseason. You're right. Like, there's interest, but that's not a good price point at this point at plus 225. I know it's a name, and I know it's a creative, speedy, shifty guy in the middle of the field, but that's probably not one that I would touch this week. I also saw from Oregon Fishing that Andy is 20-3 after a bye week. I like our chances. So let me bring that up for a second, because I think that tends to be conflated with how the Chiefs have done against the spread, and the two are very, very different. So let's start with the Mahomes era. So yes, Andy Reid obviously very good after a bye over the course of his career, and good in Kansas City. But since 2018, which was Mahomes' first year as an NFL starter, the Chiefs are 4-3-0 against the spread after a bye. Now, go back to the idea of the Chiefs being 13-point favorites, 12.5-point favorites.
Right.
The Chiefs have the second largest margin of victory coming off of a bye over every team except one. Do you know who that team is, Verderame?
I'm going to guess the Titans.
You would be correct. The Titans have actually been the better team coming off of a bye than Kansas City when it comes to margin of victory. Now, one other note is worth considering regarding the Chiefs. And again, I think bettors, especially Chiefs fans who want to bet on this team, fall into this trap sometimes. And we wrote about this over at BetSided. You can read it from our guy, Ian McMillan, talking about some of the trends that I think people need to pay attention to when it comes to taking the Chiefs at a big number this week. Going back pretty much over the last 2 years, the Chiefs are 7-18 against the spread as a favorite of more than 3 points. Now, you might look at that number and say, well, that's not particularly good. They play too many close games. Mahomes tends to bail them out. The defense has been bad, so on and so forth. All those arguments are legitimate. But if you're looking at something positive out of there, the Chiefs are 5-6 against the spread since 2020 as a double-digit favorite, including 3-1 against the spread in their last 4 games. So they've answered the call fairly recently when it comes to being a big favorite. And so maybe you look at this game, look at the matchup, look at Malik Willis as the starting quarterback and say to yourself, I know that most of these trends would go against Kansas City here. I understand where this historical perspective is coming from. But right now, this matchup, this team, this identity, this might be an opportunity to take the Chiefs at a big number, even though a lot of the trends would tell you to go against it.
So I have a theory as to why, because that's a really interesting stat in terms of like when they're a 3-point favorite or more, why they're so bad. I think it's because in the last couple of years, especially 2020, where they were brutal against the spread, the last like 10, 11 weeks of the year, whatever it was.
Yeah, great at the start, terrible.
Right. Yeah, just could not cover a number. And I think a big part of the reason is because to get action on both sides, like Vegas has to set a number with them, or at least has in the past, where the number is just always huge. Like, or the line, the spread. Like, it's always, like, in my head, I always try to guess it before I look at it, like what the line is. And in my head, I'll be like, oh, yeah, she should be favored by maybe like 4 in this game. And I'll look at the spread, it's like 7.5. And it's because nationally, to get action on the other team, you have to go that way, or all the bets in the world are going to go the other direction. I could be wrong. That's just my theory. And I think that's why a lot of times with the Chiefs, like they haven't covered these spreads because these spreads are out. Like I think Buffalo's about to get to that point, by the way, where
they didn't cover last week. And they should have.
Right. And like right now, what are they? 13 points favorite on the road against the Jets.
Well, last time I checked, it was 12.5 on the road in a division game.
Right.
Against the good defense of the New York Jets.
You start to get to a point when you get that good where Vegas has to just set a line that is just like, this is how we have to set it to get the action on the other side of it. And I think Buffalo, you're going to start watching Buffalo not cover a lot of these spreads because these lines are just ridiculous. Like some of these lines just get so big. And like in a game like this, for an example, do I think the Chiefs are 12.5 points better than Tennessee? I got to be honest with you. With or without Willis, yeah, I think they are. But it's a huge line. Like this could be a game where the Chiefs just blow them out and it's 34-17 and Tennessee scores some garbage touchdown. Covered. So I think there's a lot of that. I remember that 2020 season I was just talking about where they didn't cover, and a lot of those games, they would be up by like 20 points. And then they let the team back in, and it was never really that close, but they wouldn't cover. Because they give up 14 points in the fourth quarter. Like that's the kind of stuff you have to consider when you're betting. Whereas when you're looking at it from a straight up perspective, it's who cares, right? But you care when you bet on it.
It's a good point. And while you were going through some of that information, I wanted to actually go and see how these teams have done relative to the number over the last couple of years. So Buffalo is an interesting case because you're right. These lines for the Bills are starting to really take off. But part of the reason for that is they have, and I went back since 2021. So over the last, week 9 now? So we're talking about the last 25, 26 games.
Yep.
Going back to the start of the 2021 season when both Buffalo and Kansas City were the consensus top 2 teams in the AFC. Buffalo is 14-9-3 against the spread since 2021. They're covering just under 61% of the time. Part of the reason for that is they have by far and away the biggest margin of victory in these games, plus 12.4. And I've talked about this with you before. When Buffalo wins, they beat the hell out of you. They just destroy you. And then when they lose games, most of those times they've been one possession games. Up until this year, Buffalo, I think, had been 0-7 over the last 2 years in single possession games, which is remarkable considering how good of a team they are. But that was just a bugaboo for them. They just couldn't get over that hump. They've since done that. Dallas has actually been the best against the spread team over the last 2 years. They've covered at over 73% of their games. They're against the spread plus minus. Against the number is plus 5.5. That's by far and away the best number in the NFL. And that's also bad for sports books because the Cowboys have been a public team forever. It's been the Cowboys, it's been the Packers. We're now starting to see it with Buffalo and with Kansas City as well. So eventually these books start to make adjustments. But the last year was rough because Dallas and Green Bay were the two best covering teams in the NFL, and the public loves both those teams. The Chiefs, as to where they rank in all of this, for being a good team for the last 2 years, Kansas City, 13-14 against the spread since 2021, covering 48.2% of their games. Their margin of victory, impressive, third best in the NFL at 7.1 points per game. But they're against the spread plus minus is middle of the pack at plus 1.8. In fact, it's not middle of the pack. It's actually pretty strong. It comes in at 7th, but it goes exactly to your point. Yep. The reasonable number for the Chiefs is not always going to be the number that Vegas sets. And I think bettors, especially Chiefs fans that want to take the line on Kansas City, need to keep that in consideration.
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of times, like, look, I'm not a gambler, but if I was, I would stay away from Chiefs games because the Chiefs play in a way or Buffalo, let's be frank too, Buffalo has a better defense, and you won't get some of those points late in the game where the Chiefs, I think, are average defensive. But a lot of times, like if you look at the Chiefs' defensive rankings, like their counting stats, they're not good defensively because they will give up points late in games. Right. Like if you go and look, they give up 31 points to Tampa. Tampa was never in that game. That game was never close. But the Chiefs will sit there and they'll trade you time for points. They'll do it. They did it against Arizona at the end of that game. Arizona scored 21 points at the end of the game. The Chiefs were up by 1 million going into the fourth quarter. They didn't care that Arizona scored 2 touchdowns. You know, you look at games like that. The Chiefs have a long-standing history of doing that, where they'll sit back and they'll say, "Look, we don't care if you score 2 touchdowns if we're up by 28 points, but it's going to take you the quarter to do it." And look, straight up, you don't care, right? Like if you're Steve Spagnuolo, what do you care? All right, yeah, it hurts your rankings. You don't care. You don't care, right? You're winning. Well, you care if you're betting a number. So then you care a lot. It's also a reason an under would always make me a little nervous with the Chiefs. Although this is one game, Tennessee just cannot throw the football. Like I don't know that I'd even really care about garbage time in this game. But look, let's get into it. We got 5 or so minutes to play with here. Where are you leaning? You said under. You like the under. Which side of the line do you like?
If Tannehill plays, I'll probably lean Tennessee. If I can get it at plus 13, I will. 12.5, I don't like as much. I'll probably, if anything, go props in this game as well. I know I mentioned that I like the under, but right now it's more of a lean as opposed to an actual bet. There's still some things that I think are worth considering here, in addition to the fact that, yes, like Tennessee is missing guys. Like Vrabel this year with a bad team is still 5-2 against the spread. Yep. The Chiefs have not covered at home this year. They're 0-3 against the spread at home. Since 2018, which was Mike Vrabel's first year in the NFL, the Titans were 22-14-0 against the spread as an underdog. We mentioned the Titans' record of success against Kansas City. There's just too many variables right now that kind of make me uncomfortable at either taking a side or a total in this game. I need to know whether or not Tannehill is starting. But that's the direction that I'm leaning in right now. It's probably on the Titans with a big number here. Again, if Willis is in, that's obviously going to change things for me. And I still probably would lean under if I can get it at 46.5. Maybe even 47 if I see it at some books like that. Couple other props, at least for me, Verderame, and I'm curious to get your pick as well. Derrick Henry is still my favorite pick to score an anytime touchdown. You can get it at even money.
Yes.
Like you mentioned the Titans' success in the red zone, like best in the NFL with Kansas City. Part of the reason is because they got a big old dude that can just roll you over. They know what they're going to do. They tell you it's going to be Derrick Henry, and Derrick Henry still wins that battle. Key is whether or not they can get into the red zone. If they do, Henry scoring a touchdown, you can get that at even money. And I also like Mahomes to go over 2.5 touchdown passes in this game. Titans have had a decent defense, especially against stopping the run, but they have struggled in holding down opponent wide receivers. They've allowed the 4th most touchdowns to wide receivers this year, and also the 10th most passing yards or receiving yards to wide receivers as well. So that could just be a field day for Mahomes to open it up with Juju, Hardman down the field. Kelsey, obviously not a wide receiver, but there's still going to be plenty of opportunities for him. So of all the props, and again, we're still waiting for a lot of these lines to come out, and you'll get more detailed analysis at BetSided and Arrowhead Addict. But those are probably the plays that I will be on this week. Henry for an anytime touchdown, and likely Mahomes over 2.5 touchdown passes.
So I love both those. I would definitely take Henry for if they score. Imagine they will score. Like Henry would be the bet there. And I'm with you on the Mahomes thing. So you brought up a great stat. So they have not been good against the pass this year, which is fascinating when you consider they've played 7 games this year. They played Josh Allen in one of them. Here are the other 6 games they've played this season, and the quarterbacks attached to them. Indianapolis twice. Both times you got Matt Ryan. Davis Mills and the Texans. Derek Carr and the Raiders at home, and Renfro did not play in that game, I don't believe. They've played Washington with Wentz, and they have won, and the Giants with Daniel Jones. And they're that bad against the pass. That is a problem if you're Tennessee. Because Patrick Mahomes is not Carson Wentz. And if you think about it, who are the receivers on those teams? Like Devontae Adams on the Raiders, Terry McLaurin on Washington, but attached to a terrible quarterback. Indianapolis and Houston have no passing attacks whatsoever. Like Brandon Cooks is fine, but he's attached to Davis Mills.
Cooks, Pittman, it's the same exact.
I mean, like just a who's who of nonsense. Like the Giants have no receivers, right? Like you go on down the line here. And they're getting beat up by these teams throwing the football. That does not bode well with Kansas City off a bye. Like I always get scared of a line that big. That's a big number. That is a lot of points. I think the Chiefs win like 34-17. If Willis plays, I think they win like 41-10. I just don't think he is in any. You've actually made the point earlier that I would make. I would expect him to have to do a lot in this game and turn the ball over as a result of it. And that's when these games can really get lopsided and just get completely out of control.
That's when your under ticket goes out the window. You get a pick 6 late in the game.
It's like one of those things where it's like it's 17-3 before half, and he throws a pick 6, and then it's just completely out of hand. I don't know who's going to play. I mean, Tannehill was limited in practice on Wednesday with the ankle. We'll see. But I like the Chiefs to cover. I would be a little nervous about just some backdoor cover from Tennessee, but I just think Henry becomes less a factor in this game. If the Chiefs get up 10-0, then all of a sudden it's like, well, you got to throw it a little bit, and here comes Robert Woods. Game's over. So that's where I fall on it.
Yeah, there's nobody right now that's scary. I liked the rookie that they took out of Ole Miss, but he's on injured reserve. Like there was some potential there for him to step into AJ Brown's role, but there's nothing right now. There's cupboard is bare, and the Chiefs basically told you we love our young corners and traded away Rashad Fenton for a 7th round pick. So that should tell you something about the confidence they have in their secondary moving forward. And Tennessee's not going to scare any of them.
So I talked to people actually around the team when they traded Rashad Fenton because I was lucky enough to break the compensation for it. And I was told unequivocally, this trade, a huge, huge part of it was these young corners. That they love these corners. The three rookies and Snead. And so basically Fenton was about to be the 5th cornerback on the team. Like, he wasn't just going to be behind Jalen Watson. He was also going to be behind Joshua Williams. So the Chiefs love these kids. They're getting McDuffie back this week. And then you just look at this and you sit there and go, okay, well, if they feel that good about these guys, well, then you can trade Fenton and you can get $1.4 million in cap space, which is what they did. I mean, I don't even think they care so much about the pick. They wanted the cap space. And Fenton gets to go play in Atlanta. So it gives him the opportunity to continue to play and not just get buried on the bench and be upset. But by the way, what is the prop for Henry this week? What's the yardage total for him this week?
Haven't come out with yardage.
Okay.
Well, the bulk of books will usually do anytime touchdowns a little bit earlier rather than the props.
Gotcha.
I mean, Henry's numbers have been terrific. He's had 4 straight games of over 100 yards rushing. Last week, 32 carries for 219 yards rushing. My guess is that it'll probably be set at, I don't know if they'll set it at over 100.
100?
Just
No. Okay.
I don't think so, just because I think they're taking game script into consideration. Like, if it was Henry last week against the Texans, then it's a different story, right? Like, that was set, I think, maybe in the high 90s. I'll guess Henry gets set at maybe the high 80s, low 90s this week. I would set it at 88.5.
Okay.
Derrick Henry rushing yards this week, and I have a feeling that'll likely get bet down.
By the way, the last thing I have here is one thing because I've had a lot of Chiefs fans ask me this, or just say this to me. Is the Chiefs have struggled when they've been in base defense. The Niners have beat them up in it. The Raiders beat them up in it. The Bills beat them up in it. The Raiders, interestingly enough, put 6 offensive linemen on the field for part of that game. I wonder if the Titans will do the same thing. If the Titans are just going to say, look, we got to do something outside the box here to win. The one difference I would point to in this game, and I'm not saying the Titans won't be able to run the ball, but I'm just a point to consider. The Niners can also throw the football. They have all these weapons that scare you, right? It's Debo, and it's McCaffrey as a passer or a pass catcher, and it's Kittle, and it's Ayuk. Bills obviously have a bunch of guys who can throw the ball. Spagnuolo, even after the game, said, look, if they wanted to run the ball, we're going to let them.
Yeah.
Makes sense. The Raiders, all kinds of weapons on the outside. The Titans do not have that. Like, the Chiefs have to respect those other teams throwing the football. They do not have to respect Tennessee throwing the football. This game to me is a lot more like the Indy game from a defensive standpoint, where you basically go, look, we're stopping Jonathan Taylor, and anything else is irrelevant. So that's something to keep in mind. I don't think it's going to have the same result as the Indy game. The Chiefs basically donated that game. But just something to keep in mind, I would expect the Chiefs to just absolutely descend on Henry in this game and say, look, we'll Bulls play you man everywhere else. We're not worried about it. Beat us.
Fair enough.
All right.
Yeah, there's a lot to consider for that one. I'll be curious as to where this line continues to move throughout the course of the week. And again, we'll have all that for you, both at Arrowhead Addict and also at BetSided.
All right. He is Ben Heisler of BetSided. Make sure to check out both BetSided on Twitter at BetSided and check out BetSided at fansided.com/BetSided for Ben's work and everybody else who does fine work over there. Ian McMillan, Peter Dewey, the whole crew. For Ben, I am Matt Verderame. I'll be back later today, 4 o'clock Central, to talk to you about the Chiefs and the Titans from a non-betting perspective with Patrick Allen. We'll have plenty to get to. Until then, take it easy. Enjoy your Thursday afternoon.